During the summer of 2015, a former Wall Street trader named Ryan Kovanoff saw his film company collapse into a bankruptcy of $1 billion, all because he believed movie success could be predicted by a computer algorithm. His company, Relativity Media, had promised investors that a mathematical model running Monte Carlo simulations could guarantee a 70% success rate across a portfolio of mid-budget movies. Instead, a string of high-profile box office duds proved that even the most sophisticated statistical slates cannot escape the brutal truth of Hollywood economics. Movie studios spend hundreds of millions of dollars producing films in a high-risk venture model where a single blockbuster hit must subsidize several expensive box office failures. Traditional studios rely on a portfolio model of film slate financing, spreading their capital across a dozen or more projects each year. This math is simple and brutal. They know that the vast majority of their theatrical releases will lose money, and only a tiny fraction will generate substantial returns. One breakout hit has to pay for all the duds and still generate enough cash to keep the lights on. Such a strategy works on paper, but it requires access to billions of dollars in cheap capital to survive the dry spells. If a studio goes 2 years without a breakout hit, the interest on its debt will eat it alive. Although a single film can lose $100 million in a weekend, the real survival mechanism of a modern studio relies on an asset class that has nothing to do with cinema ticket sales. Indeed, this commercial reality does not stop wealthy individuals and massive corporations from dreaming of owning a movie studio. Investors see the glamour of the red carpet and the potential for a massive global payout. Admission to this exclusive club carries a staggering price tag. A new operator starting from scratch faces immense capital barriers before a single frame can be shot. Building a single modern soundstage can cost $10 million to $20 million, and a viable studio lot needs multiple stages. Such physical infrastructure requires specialized soundproofing alongside massive electrical grids to handle the heat of heavy lighting rigs. Real estate is only the beginning. Owners must spend millions of dollars on high-end camera gear and lighting packages that must be constantly updated to avoid obsolescence. Because of these barriers, buying an established studio is often more attractive than building one from the ground up. When Amazon wanted to expand its entertainment division, it bought the historic Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio in 2022 for $8.45 billion. Disney went even further in 2019, acquiring the assets of 20th Century Fox for $71.3 billion. These multi-billion-dollar acquisitions extend far beyond the physical real estate and the production equipment. Catalogs are highly valuable because they can be repurposed for modern digital distribution. But if a studio owner does not have billions to buy a legacy catalog, they must build a new slate of films, and that requires a complex web of financing. Producing a slate of movies is so expensive that studios rarely fund projects entirely with their own cash reserves. Instead, they assemble a complex puzzle of co-financing partners and international pre-sales. Under co-financing arrangements, 2 or more studios share the production costs and split the eventual revenues based on their initial investment. For example, Legendary Pictures has repeatedly partnered with Warner Bros. To co-fund massive productions like Dune, reducing the financial exposure for both companies. Pre-sales are another vital tool. Before filming even begins, a studio will sell the distribution rights for specific foreign territories to local distributors. A Japanese distributor might pay $5 million for the rights to show the movie in Japan, while a German distributor pays $4 million. Studios aggregate these contracts and use them as collateral to secure bank loans. Specialized entertainment banks like Comerica or Union Bank will lend money against these pre-sale contracts to cover the actual production cost. Producers also rely on state and national tax incentives. Governments around the world offer tax credits and rebates to attract film production, sometimes covering up to 30% of the local spending. Filming in Georgia or the United Kingdom allows a studio to qualify for these rebates, using them to pay down their high-interest bank loans. But this complex financial architecture has a dark side for equity investors. Recoupment waterfall terms determine who gets paid first when the money starts flowing back. Banks and distributors take their fees and principal payments before the studio or its investors see a single dollar of profit. If a movie underperforms, the equity investors lose everything, while the banks are still paid from the pre-sales and tax credits. Wall Street firms have repeatedly lost hundreds of millions of dollars trying to finance film slates because of this structural risk. Yet, even with financing secured, the studio owner must manage the ballooning costs of the actual production. Production expenses required to make a modern studio film are divided into 2 distinct categories: above-the-line and below-the-line costs. Above-the-line costs cover the creative talent, including the director and the lead actor. Top-tier stars can demand upfront salaries of $20 million per film. These stars often negotiate back-end deals, which give them a percentage of the film's first dollar gross revenues before the studio even breaks even. Below-the-line costs cover the physical production crew and equipment rental. Crew rosters can include hundreds of technicians hired to build elaborate physical sets that will only be used for a few days. Location scouting adds another layer of expense. Moving a crew of 200 people to a remote location in Iceland requires temporary housing and daily catering. Physical studio leases are a massive fixed cost during production. Rentals of soundstages can run for months at a time, costing up to $5,000 a day per stage just to store sets and equipment. Special effects represent one of the fastest growing expenses in modern filmmaking. For action blockbusters, digital effects can easily consume 30% to 50% of the total production budget. Visual effects houses are hired to render complex digital environments and characters, a process that can take years of work by hundreds of digital artists. Back in 2022, director James Cameron pushed these costs to the limit with Avatar: The Way of Water. Budget figures ballooned to an estimated $350 million, driven by underwater motion capture technology developed specifically for the film. Breaking even requires the movie to become one of the highest-grossing films in cinematic history. Even if a studio manages to control these physical production costs, they are only halfway to the finish line. Once the film is completed, the studio must spend a second, often larger fortune to let the world know it exists. This expenditure is known as print and advertising, or P&A. Historically, print referred to the physical film reels shipped to thousands of theaters, but today it covers the digital distribution files and security keys. Advertising is where the real money is spent. Within the modern film industry, the marketing budget for a major theatrical release frequently matches or exceeds the actual production cost. Marketing for Barbie in 2023 cost an estimated $150 million, while the production itself cost $145 million. Their campaign included custom brand partnerships and turning the internet pink through viral social media stunts. Universal Pictures matched the $100 million production budget of Oppenheimer with another $100 million in marketing. Every marketing dollar spent is a high-stakes gamble. Studios must buy television advertising slots and massive billboard placements months in advance. Unlike production costs, which are spread over years, marketing budgets are spent in a concentrated burst right before the release date. Opening weekend failures mean the entire marketing budget is lost immediately, with no way to scale back the spending. Executives cannot cancel billboards or television commercials that have already aired. Front-loaded expenses explain why studios are increasingly hesitant to release original films. It is much cheaper to market a sequel or a film based on an established toy line than it is to introduce audiences to an entirely new concept. Yet, this massive spend is required because theatrical exhibition is the engine that drives every other revenue stream. Theatrical release is the first and most visible way a movie studio generates revenue, but it is not a direct cash register. Box office totals reported in the media do not go straight to the studio. Theater owners keep a significant portion of every ticket sold. Across the United States, the theatrical split is typically 50-50, meaning the studio only receives half of the box office receipts. Powerful studios can negotiate a higher split for major blockbusters, sometimes taking up to 65% of the ticket sales during the opening weeks. Internationally, the split is much less favorable to the studio. Mature European markets typically return 40% of the box office to the studio. Chinese regulations are even tighter, legally capping foreign studios at receiving only 25% of the box office revenue. Ticket sales are rarely enough to cover both the production and the marketing budgets. Grossing at least $600 million worldwide is necessary to break even on a movie that costs $150 million to make and $150 million to market. Achieving true profitability requires the studio to compile a variety of post-theatrical revenue streams. Physical and digital retail represents the second window. Digital downloads are sold on platforms like iTunes, while physical discs are distributed to retail stores. While physical media sales have declined significantly, they once represented the highest margin sector of the business. During the height of the DVD boom in the early 2000s, home video sales generated more profit than the theatrical run itself. Today, that revenue has been largely replaced by licensing to streaming platforms. A studio will license its films to third-party streaming services like Netflix or Prime Video for a fixed fee over a specific time period. Such licensing deals are often structured in complex packages where the platform pays for a bundle of hits and flops together. Merchandise licensing represents the most lucrative revenue stream of all for major franchises. Disney has generated billions of dollars in retail sales from toys and apparel based on its characters. Successful movies can generate more profit from toy sales than from ticket sales, making the film itself a commercial for the merchandise. Maintaining this complex compilation of revenue streams becomes even harder when factoring in monthly overhead. Operating a movie studio involves massive, ongoing fixed costs that must be paid whether or not a film is actively shooting. Legacy properties like the Warner Bros. Burbank lot or Pinewood Studios in the United Kingdom are massive real estate operations. Monthly overhead includes property taxes and physical maintenance of soundstages that can span tens of thousands of square feet. Utility bills alone can be astronomical. Keeping climate-controlled environments stable in massive buildings requires specialized HVAC systems running day and night to protect sensitive sets and equipment. Administrative salaries for legal teams and distribution executives represent another major fixed expense. Security teams must work round the clock to protect physical assets and prevent unauthorized access to sets. Total fixed costs can easily exceed $10 million per month for a major studio lot. Empty soundstages mean these expenses quickly eat into the profits generated by past hits. Leasing empty soundstages to independent production companies or commercial creators helps mitigate this risk. Even when the studio lot is fully utilized, calculating the actual profitability of a movie is famously difficult due to Hollywood accounting. Hollywood accounting is a set of opaque, contract-specific practices designed to minimize a film's reported net profit. Studios routinely charge internal distribution fees and production overhead to the film's budget. A studio might charge a 15% overhead fee directly to the film's budget, even though the physical infrastructure is already paid for. Distributors also charge interest on the cash advanced for production, adding millions of dollars to the paper cost of the movie. Because of these practices, blockbuster films that gross hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office can show a net loss on paper. Historical records show that Forrest Gump grossed over $600 million worldwide, but reportedly showed a loss on the studio's books for years. Winston Groom, the author of the original novel, had a contract for 3% of the net profits, but the studio claimed the movie lost $60 million despite grossing $678 million. Paramount accomplished this by deducting massive distribution fees and the gross profit shares of the lead actor and director. Opaque accounting protects the studio's bottom line, but frustrates creators who lack the leverage to demand a percentage of the gross revenue. On a corporate level, the media conglomerates that own major studios do not rely on individual film profits to satisfy shareholders. They operate as vertically integrated businesses where films are used as tools to drive revenue elsewhere. Underperforming theatrical films can still drive millions of consumers to buy merchandise or visit theme parks. Disney uses its film releases to build intellectual property that fuels its theme parks and cruise lines. Every theatrical release becomes a marketing expense for the broader corporate ecosystem. Corporate diversification is why the major studios have survived for a century while independent studios frequently vanish after a few flops. Industry average EBITDA margins for media and entertainment companies are thin, typically hovering between 5% and 6%. Independent studios do not have the luxury of vertical integration and must survive on a project-by-project basis. Without theme parks or merchandise, these smaller companies cannot salvage a box office flop. 2 consecutive flops can mean bankruptcy for a small studio. Hollywood history is littered with independent production companies that had one big hit and then went under. Funding a slate with borrowed money means that when they fail to recoup the marketing costs, they find themselves unable to pay their debts. Frequent cash flow mismatches are the primary reason why new studio ventures fail within their first 5 years. Modern theatrical windows are no longer the guaranteed cash cow they once were. Audience behavior has shifted, with many viewers preferring to wait for films to arrive on home streaming services. Such shifting preferences have forced studios to shorten the theatrical window from 90 days down to 45 days or less. Shorter windows mean less time to recoup production costs in theaters, increasing the pressure on secondary revenue streams. Streaming platforms have also changed how studios value their libraries. Owning a back catalogue of hundreds or thousands of old films provides a studio with its most valuable asset. Streaming companies need a constant stream of content to keep subscribers from canceling their monthly subscription. Buying or building a catalog of content is often the only way to compete. Catalog value drove Amazon to buy Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, securing the rights to 4,000 movies and 17,000 television episodes. Acquired libraries include franchises like James Bond and Rocky, which can be remade or spun off into new series. Value resides in the intellectual property rights that can be licensed over and over rather than in the physical film reels. Recent shifts toward catalog valuation have changed the entire economics of movie studio ownership. Studios are no longer just factory operations producing art, they are intellectual property holding companies. New investors often aim to build a small library of films and then sell the entire company to a larger distributor or streaming platform. It is a game of scale where only the largest players can survive the inherent volatility. Look at the survival rate of new independent distributors over the last 2 decades to understand the scale of this volatility. Dozens of companies have launched with ambitious slates, only to dissolve when their initial funding ran dry. Surviving entities are those that focused on low-budget, high-margin genre films rather than trying to compete with blockbusters. Niche producers like A24 have carved out a profitable space by keeping production budgets low and targeting specific, loyal audiences. Their films often cost less than $15 million to produce, meaning they do not need $100 million on dollar box office returns to break even. Focusing on niche marketing and low budgets reduces the leverage required to stay in business. Major studios, however, find that the high leverage model remains the only way to support their massive overhead. Conglomerates are locked in a cycle of producing increasingly expensive films to attract audiences to theaters, which in turn requires larger marketing budgets. One major flop can wipe out the profits of 3 successful mid-budget releases in this high-risk environment. Structural volatility explains why the traditional studio model is slowly being absorbed by tech giants. Companies like Apple and Amazon do not need their film divisions to be profitable on a standalone basis. Both tech firms use movies as marketing tools to sell phones and Prime subscriptions. Traditional studio owners without a parent tech company find the margins are simply too thin to justify the risk. Studio executives must compete for screen space and pay exorbitant salaries to stars while facing the rising costs of physical production. Owning a movie studio remains a powerful dream, but the financial reality is a grinding battle of cash flow and debt management. Predictive algorithms that promise to remove the human element and predict success have failed to deliver on their promises. Ryan Kavanaugh's data-driven model could not account for the shifting tastes of audiences or the sudden rise of digital streaming platforms. Ultimately, the math was simple. Available bank accounts were empty. Proprietary databases were sold off to satisfy creditors, and the library of films that was supposed to guarantee infinite returns was auctioned off for a fraction of its predicted worth.